Chapter 16. At break, she moseyed over to the bench where Taylor and the others spoke excitedly in hushed tones. "You not heard!" Taylor beamed, slinging her long brown hair back in a ponytail. "Teachers won't say a thing, but they all look pretty flustered, and our guest speaker today's canceled." "Could be sick," Grace offered, slumping beside her. "I don't think so. Look who's patrolling the gate." Taylor gestured to the infamous samples, the tops of their helmets just visible over the wall. "Aren't they dreamy?" Taylor gushed as Grace realized she wasn't the only one with a good imagination. She could barely see the tops of their helmet, let alone make out what any of them looked like. They could be clumps of solder and wire for all she knew. "They're muscle." Taylor's swoon ducking the bullet of a tennis ball Grace caught just inches from her face. Glancing at the group of young lads who'd thrown it, Grace looked at Taylor to continue, keen to avoid the bemused looks of those who witnessed the catch. She could see the sample they'd been talking about had turned their way and was facing them. Kevlar and body armor glinted majestically, and to Grace it seemed he were like something out of a comic book. He held her stare, and though far off, there was something about him, something oddly familiar. Loose curls fell about her face as she shook her head. Now it was her imagination whirling out of control. The way people were still staring, she was clearly the only oddity. Thankfully, the bell rang, and scooping up her bag, Grace hurried off to English. Chaos in the classroom faded as students piled up against the window, watching the samples outside, swapping ideas as to what on earth could have brought them here. But they were quickly ushered back to their seats by a feathery young woman with a pale face, large dark eyes, and short neck. She was unconventionally pretty and always calm, though today she did seem a little flustered. Mrs. Barnes switched on the VR simulation, and students began to settle, pulling on headsets and immersing themselves in a version of the book they'd studied last week. Noise in the classroom settled as a dreamlike world submerged theirs, combining fact and fiction, with a taste of the intangible, creating something beautiful, feeding imagination. Grace had fallen in love with this story from start to finish, a midsummer night's dream, her mind flooded with unanswered questions. How much control do people have over their lives? Life and dreams that seemed interconnected and interchangeable with the bizarre reality they found themselves in, both asleep and awake. How much could you really trust what you saw? How much of substance was unseen? That nonsensical behavior, so often displayed as part of the norm. And then there was the darker side of love, where the rules no longer seemed to apply, and the notion that all of it was a dream. The crazy story made complete sense, opaque until the end. Third period saw them delve into maths, and Grace sat completing advanced algebra. She found comfort in numbers and had already jumped a couple years. She couldn't explain it, but for a long time she'd come to find there was something about the patterns and equations, the ability to view the same thing from different angles, to grasp a more complete picture of what wasn't always obvious at first. For some time now, Grace had come to feel that understanding maths was key to understanding just about everything, and in a very practical way, it could be used to map and navigate a world with shifting tides and unexplored depth. By lunch, much of the excitement over the samples would have died down, she supposed, had it not been for the arrival of a stout, balding man that marched through the grounds to their headmaster's office. "That's Hobbs," Chico gasped. "Head of defense at Inter. Can you imagine people at our school helping to develop things on Halo? Could be us soon." "That's why he's here?" The question fell out of Grace as she strolled up to the bench. "Must be." Chico and the others continued to speculate as she took a seat beside Taylor. Biting into her sandwich, listening to her friends swoon over the samples who could still be seen patrolling the West Quadrant. Grace was taken back by chalky spores that dust up her nose, sending the sandwich tumbling back out into the Ziploc bag, where she eyed it critically. "Tell me that didn't get your heart going." An excited elbow caught Grace off guard, where it drove into her ribs. "He smiled at us, beneath that helmet. I know he did. He keeps looking over." Taylor beamed. Grace felt sick, but managed a wounded smile. Why Mum insisted on using up old moldy leftovers when they had 3D food printers, she'd never understand. "Grace?" Taylor's bright eyes fixed on her. Scratching around for something useful to add, Grace offered a shrug. "It's his shoulders, right?" Taylor gushed. "Yeah," Grace mumbled, attention returning to the furry sandwich, inspecting it. She should be a qualified mycologist by now, thanks to Mum. Sliding the bag under her coat, she couldn't help but wonder if the doors through space-time were a bit like that Ziploc bag. Could you be any less interested? Taylor watched her friend blush. They all look the same, she offered. Truth be told, everything paled in comparison to Mobius. All her thoughts seemed to lead back to it, and 87. But as that notion surfaced, the sample from the wall glanced over again, and Grace found herself unnervingly attuned to it. He looked like every other sample, covered in angular high-grade body armor and helmet, though he seemed aware of them, aware of her. More than that, he seemed to be listening, reacting. Memories of her move to Hydra flooded back, to the sample at the gate. Grace shook her head. She was beginning to sound ridiculous, even to herself. There were so many of them, and they were much too far away for anyone to hear. Besides, samples had far more important things to do than nosy in on Teen Talk. They certainly couldn't access her innermost thoughts. Their presence and mysterious identities must have sparked her overactive imagination. No one knew exactly what samples were capable of. "Not your type. Do you have a pulse?" Taylor practically shrieked as a wounded laugh escaped her red-headed friend. "Wait, there's someone else, isn't there? Spill Little Miss secrets." Grace's face burned as all eyes round the bench turned on her, and she watched Chico's expression fall. There wasn't anyone else, not in any real sense, although she did wonder if anyone could live up to her imagination, the feel of Mobius, or the company of 87. Arrogant as he was, he offered a fascinating take on this strange world and seemed to understand both it and her, connecting her back to universal truths and cycles, patterns and perspective. But they were her subconscious playing about with reality. She could hardly explain that to Taylor or anyone else for that matter. People already thought her odd. "Fine, have your secrets for now, Mrs. Leaves more samples for us." Taylor chuckled, turning to the other girls around the bench, who agreed, much to the disapproval of both Seiko and Ewan. After lunch, Grace filed into science. Peering through the microscope, she watched the curious world inside a world, like a nesting doll. Molecular biology was fascinating. Studying DNA's classic double helix form, watching the DNA replication machine on the computer simulation, playing overhead as it unwound and unzipped itself for repair. Next up, they zoomed out to look at the whole chromosome. It copied itself and split in two. The dynamic scaffolding, where it met the chromosome, a signal broadcasting system, having indicated that it was ready for separation. The molecules were working in unison as a community, orchestrating healthy growth and separation. These little motor proteins, kinesin and others, seemed like little alien beings in this microscopic space, living inside her, and the idea struck Grace. What if people were like this little kinesin, part of a larger body, and what might happen should they deviate from their role, from their original coding? Given the troubles, she suspected they already knew the answer to that, having witnessed the collapse of a larger structure. The more she thought on, the more everything felt deeply connected, pattern, the symmetry and behavior. These tiny proteins, all parts of a larger structure, and all oblivious to the nesting dolls which contain them, and the greater function they support. She affectionately watched the little kinesin proteins, these miniature motorized machines transporting components inside people to support their cells' wider function. Protein 53, machine-like in its speed, fixing damaged DNA. Glancing at the lab footage of them moving in real time, they looked like stars twinkling in the night sky before dying out. Their little delicate life, crucial, beautiful, but a breath, and she wondered if it felt to them as though time passed more slowly for something so small. Microscopic particles move so fast compared to their size. The gravitational distortion of time had to weigh smaller on such things. Settling into her final lesson of the day, music, Grace searched the room for a place to hide. Their end-of-term solo was due, and despite her love of music, she was dreading it. Why couldn't they send in a pre-recorded performance? She loved music. It saturated everything, encompassed the spirit of polymath itself, but perform, no. She picked a seat at the back of the hall and shrank into it. Listening to the others perform, she felt rhythm splash, immersive color, and a variety of flavor over ideas, stories, and language. It seemed to distill pain and joy, mixing a recipe of intangible forces from the transcendent to craft something new and divine, enough to reprogram perspective and even one's molecular structure, uniting groups previously unconnected as well as birth something new in oneself. A modern miracle. But as the next song finished, shock bolt through her as they called her name. Lord, her turn. Grace's tiny frame and mop of red curls sat center stage, peering over the grand piano. Cashmere sleeves pulled as far over her skinny wrists and hands as they'd reach, while the piano stood to shield her on an otherwise naked stage. It was too quiet. Forcing out shaky breath, shouldering the weight of many eyes, her fingers began to dance over polished keys between black and white. Rhythm and rhyme swirled around, creating a vortex of ribboning tales, while order and madness spun structured threads of logic and lunacy, notes gently keying God's light touch through hearts and minds. Her rendition of Skylar Gray's Love the Way You Lie, as haunting as it was beautiful. Soon Grace found she was no longer in the room, but adrift, bathing in the flavor of notes, weightless and free. From 87's post along the perimeter wall, the scent of lyrics and melody from soft pink lips jarred his attention. He knew that voice well enough. It swept through Mobius, the softly spoken parody of artfully crafted word, between man and what is, hardening 87's crystal gaze. In a moment, his conscience sank into Mobius, surfacing in the hall. In song, its echo a haunting duet of transcendent forces. Lyric and rhyme spun the gyroscope of narrative, crafting maps and meaning. The vortex this created in Mobius was mesmerizing for those with eyes to see, though most could only feel it shaping the atmosphere. Living water and light manifest into strange shapes around her on stage. Its tornado, love, lies, and many rings with eyes. 87's narrowed on it. As Grace sang on, words heavied the atmosphere, and he began to make out moving images in the silent storm that followed. Grace's collage of people and their stories combined their genesis. The author's lyric in countless hertz rang out through her rising octave, a parody between man and God. 87's jaw firmed, glittering defiance smoldering in his eyes. As beautiful as it was, conviction dwarfed him. It wasn't a performance, it was a dance with the profound, an animation of relationships and reaction. Despite the pain in this perfect storm that flooded the stage, connecting them all, her voice remained gentle, warm. The same words felt by both parties carried vastly different meaning from where they joined in chorus. Their tornado, an uplifting collage of God, the fall of man and misunderstanding, opposing forces and perspectives, powerfully colliding in chorus, creating something delicate, unique, and utterly beautiful. The ultimate tragedy and romance between man and what is. In the swirls around her, 87 could make out moving images, torture, betrayal, war, murder, greed, and lies. A tragic average day in human history. But there amongst it all, he saw a flaming bush. Love, passion, and pain, all burning. Even angels had wicked schemes, while God's people took indifference and evil to new extremes, and yet her voice remained gentle, a whisper of grace from fundamental truths that rang out. Love the way you lie. Legatus in spilt from Grace's lips as the song drew to a close. He watched many lie down to rest, to access Mobius, the restorative wisdom and energy calming the storm and turning things around. 87 saw Dante most damned, those who lie, the lie itself betraying their desire to separate themselves from bad action and identify with something good. As delicate fingers began to still over black and white keys, the warmth of her breath and atmosphere began to dissipate. And as the last note stilled, she woke to the applause and standing ovation that broke out in the school hall.